All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Pedro Caro, and welcome to the third annual California College Affordability Summit. So glad you are here. You're in for a great session this morning. Um, I'm here to provide virtual support for the presenters today, as well as you. So if you have any issues with tech, go ahead and send me a message, and I will do my best to support you. All of the resources that you'll see today will be made available to you by the end of the day or the end of the conference. So look out for that. As you have been made aware, you should be muted, but please go ahead and use the chat function if you have any questions for our presenters, and we'll do our best to get those answered in a timely manner during the session or at the end of the session. And I think on that note, I'll go ahead and introduce our wonderful speakers today. We have Mr. Edwin Chikukwa and Ms. Jenny Jiang representing the Cash for College program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pedro. Really appreciate you for that introduction. So yeah, as Pedro pretty much mentioned, if you have questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to ask using the chat function. We have a 1.5 hour presentation that we're trying to condense to 55 minutes. So we're going to be moving really quickly, but because y'all are going to get this PowerPoint, I will definitely, I'll breeze over some concepts because y'all be able to look at them more in depth yourselves. But with that being said, excited to be here, excited to give y'all this presentation. And without wasting any time, we're pretty much going to get into it. Also, I am also going to turn off my camera at this point because I know that can get really distracting. I talk a lot with my hands, so I don't want y'all to get distracted. I want y'all to focus on all this amazing content that is right in front of your eyes. So I'm going to turn off my camera, but my audio is still working. Just let me know. I am curious about the question Pedro asked. Where's everybody coming from? Got some Sacramentans, we got some SoCal people. Like, yeah, where's everybody coming from? So we can get a sense of what the reach is. San Diego, Los Angeles, Redlands, Long Beach, Carlsbad. Awesome. Merced, Moreno Valley. Cool. Fulton, California. Okay, cool. Okay, we got a bit of a spread. Lots of SoCal people too. Awesome. So that being said, I'm going to turn my camera off now. And let's talk about the goals for today. So for the goals for today, we're going to talk about the FAFSA and the California GMAT application. We're going to review parts of the application that may be difficult, and then we're going to try and answer questions that some of y'all will have. Like I said, please feel free to ask them in the chat function. I just noticed there's about a couple of people actually from CSAC who joined who might be able to assist with the questions y'all may have. So please feel free to ask them because we're going to be moving really quickly through this presentation. Let's see, let's get this to work. And so that being said, we got a lot of people joining right now. Okay, with that being said, some things to know, as you all know, as counselors, we want to make sure that we're getting our students to complete the A through G courses. We want to make sure that we're getting them to complete all the different sports and requirements that they can get into college. I'm not going to spend too much time on this stuff because y'all know that stuff about preparing for college. But when it does come to financial aid, particularly, we want to make sure that they start thinking about their financial aid applications towards the end of their junior year, because the application will open up October 1st of their senior year. So we want to make sure that they start thinking about that, and not just them, but as well as their parents, and or guardians. Because for most students who are graduating high school, they're going to need that parent information. They're going to need that guardian information to fill out their application. So that's for most high school seniors. They're going to need that information. Even a lot of community college students, it's I think right now it's kind of a 50-50 split. Some will need parent information, some will not. We'll go through what determines that. But yeah, please, if you have the opportunity, start getting that information into the parents' heads, start into the guardians' heads, into the students' head, like, hey, this financial aid application is coming up. Make sure you're ready for it. So while you're thinking about the colleges you want to apply for, make sure that you're also thinking about applying for financial aid. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there's about 2 applications. There is the California GMAT application, which I will refer to as the CADAA. That one is for our undocumented students. And then there's the free application for federal student aid, which I'll refer to as the FAFSA. That was for our citizens and permanent residents. That's a pretty simplistic way of looking at both of them. So I'm going to keep calling it the CADAA because it's kind of a lot to say California GMAT application every single time. And also I'm going to call this one the FAFSA because once again, it's also a lot to say free application for federal student aid. I've gotten really good at saying them, but I want to use the acronym so that, we can conserve time and y'all know what I'm talking about. But if at any point any of you all forget, please feel free to ask in the chat. But CADAA, that is for undocumented students. FAFSA, that is for our citizens and permanent residents. Okay. Awesome. Now, how much money can I get? That's what a lot of students and parents and guardians ask us when we go and host Cash for College workshops. And I think now I realize that I might not have explained what my actual job is. As Cash for College, as the Cash for College coordinator, my job is to pretty much go around the state of California hosting workshops about financial aid applications and helping students and parents with those workshops, and also helping school districts and school sites, organizations, host these workshops on their own and provide them with materials to do that. So that is what my job is to coordinate those efforts around the state of California. With that being said, whenever we go to these workshops, these Cash for College workshops or these financial aid nights, we always get the question of, well, how much money can we get? Families will always ask us this question. And the honest truth is, it depends. And I know they hate hearing that answer, but that's the best answer. It depends. Because first of all, it's cost of attendance, right? And cost of attendance, it's different from a community college versus a four-year university. A four-year public is different from a four-year private university. All of these have different costs of attendances. And then we look at the expected family contribution. That's going to change per family. So some students are going to have more income than other students. Students are going to have more people in their household than other students. All these different things affect what is called the expected family contribution, and how that information is calculated. It is based on what is put on the application. So what a student puts on their FAFSA and their CADAA, that is what is used to calculate the expected family contribution. So once we have the cost of attendance, right? And then we have the expected family contribution, we subtract expected family contribution, or EFC, from the cost of attendance, and we get the student's financial need. And that's how that calculation works. All this to say, please tell your students not to try and figure this out in their heads, not to try and calculate this on their own in their heads, because a lot of times they will get it wrong. They will absolutely get it wrong. They'll say, there's no point in me applying for financial aid because I don't think my family makes too much, or, oh, I'm undocumented. Like they get this wrong. We just tell them, please just fill out the applications. Fill out the applications and let us make that determination. And then these applications are free. So if that's not obvious, these applications are free, but I'm sure all of you know that by now. Now, how much federal student aid can a student receive? When it comes to federal student aid, this is clearly for FAFSA filers. So the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, that is a federal application that covers citizens and permanent residents. And so students who are filling out the CADAA who are undocumented, they would not qualify for federal aid. So when we're talking about federal aid in particular, we're talking mainly about our FAFSA filers, our citizens and permanent residents. So this is who it applies to. That being said, how much federal aid can they receive? Once again, it depends, but there is a Pell Grant that can be up to $6,495. Sounds like someone kind of went off mute, so if they could mute themselves. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. But yeah, federal Pell Grant. That is a grant. And when we say granted financial aid grant, that's money that does not have to be paid back. But that's $6,495. That is the max. That does not mean every student will get the max. Some students will get less. No student will probably get more. I do think the federal administration is planning on raising the Pell Grant. But right now, for this cycle, that's how much it was, $6,495. And yeah, so that is kind of the max. The federal work study. The way I best like to explain work study is by using an example, because I notice it makes it a lot more clear. So let's say a student gets on campus and they realize they're broke. I have no money. I'm broke. I'm a college student. I need money really badly. And they're like, okay, I'm getting my grant aid. I'm getting my loans. I'm getting all this other stuff, but I want to work. If they have what is called work study, what it means is they will go to a job that is a work study job on their campus. And if they have work study, it means that the federal government is subsidizing a portion of their salary. So let's say that job pays $15 an hour. I'm just using hypothetical numbers, by the way, here. Let's say the job pays $15 an hour. The federal government will subsidize that $15 an hour by paying maybe like $5 of that salary. And then the actual employer will pay the other 10. So the student is still getting their full salary, but the employer is only paying a portion of it because the federal government is subsidizing the rest of it. So this is a very great thing to have. On the FAFSA, students will be asked if they want work study. They tend to say no because they don't know what it is, but please encourage them to say yes, because it does run out at institutions. And there are certain jobs, a lot of jobs on campuses that will say, we will not hire anybody outside of work-study students because for these jobs, it's a lot cheaper. And also work-study students tend to be lower income students. So please make sure that students are saying yes to work-study and are using it because once again, it does run out per institution. Direct subsidized loans. The way I like to think about these unsubsidized and unsubsidized loans, what I'm going to mention about these particular loans, these are from the federal government. The way they work is a subsidized loan does not accrue interest while the student is in school, whereas an unsubsidized loan, it does accrue interest once the student has taken it out. So that's the difference between a subsidized loan and unsubsidized loan. So if you're talking to a student and they have the option between the two, probably want them to start their subsidized loan because it doesn't accrue interest while they're in school. It starts accruing interest after they leave school, whereas an unsubsidized loan does accrue interest once they've taken it out. So that's kind of the main difference I like to point out for subsidized loans and unsubsidized loans. They're federal loans, they tend to have better interest rates than the private market. So if the student has to choose between subsidized and unsubsidized versus a private loan, typically we direct them towards the federal government loans because they tend to be cheaper and tend to have better conditions than the private market loans. And then direct plus loan, that is a loan that parents can take on behalf of their children's education. And that loan also accrues interest while the student is in school. So this is a quick snapshot of federal aid. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, and once again, this is for FAFSA files. Only FAFSA files will be able to access federal aid. I know a couple of you have joined us. FAFSA is free application for federal student aid. That is the application for our citizens and our permanent residents. Whereas CADAA is the California GMAT application. That is a state application purely for undocumented students. Now we're going to talk about state aid. In terms of state aid, both FAFSA filers and California GMAT application filers would qualify for this. And as I'm sure it's probably becoming clear, a student should not be filling out both applications. They should only be filling out one. So I want to make sure that students are filling out one of these applications. That's why it's so important for you as educators, when you go back, to say FAFSA and CADAA, because you have no idea how hurtful it is whenever I'm in a Cash for College workshop and I hear a student tell me, my counselor told me that I am undocumented and I cannot get aid. That is untrue. That is completely untrue. And so there's still this misinformation going around California. I don't know why, considering the fact that we have this entire state aid application for our undocumented students, but want to end that misinformation. So please, 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 hopefully when you go back, all of you can make that clear to your various organizations and your communities that undocumented students can qualify for aid. Now, since that we're talking about state aid, once again, this would be for students who both file the FAFSA. So students who file the FAFSA can qualify for this. They qualify for state and federal. And California GMAT application filers also qualify for state aid. And if some of y'all are wondering why I'm breezing through this, it's because this is typically an hour and a half presentation and I have like 55 minutes. So I'm just trying to go for it. But if you have questions throughout, please type them in the chat. There are people who can definitely answer your questions. That being said, our biggest marquee program is the Cal Grant program, California Grant. I know, right? Clever name. Cal Grant program, and it can be used at various different institutions. So at a UC, you can get about $12,570 going to tuition and fees. And remember what I said earlier, if it's a grant, it's money the student doesn't have to pay back. At CSU's, $5,742 because they have a lower cost of attendance. At a community college, because of the California Promise Grant, which pretty much takes care of tuition, students can get the $1,656, which is a stipend award for a Cal Grant associated with some Cal Grants, but not all Cal Grants. And you can also get an award at private schools. And yeah, and also for those students who have dependent children, they can get the Cal Grant award that goes to tuition and fees, as well as an access award that assists them with taking care of the dependent children. So just a quick thing here. If you hear us say Cal Grant Access Award, that means that is an award on top of the Cal Grant. So a student will be Cal Grant eligible. They'll get the tuition and fees portion payment, or it'll be put on hold if they're in community college. But then they can also get an access award. Let's say if they get a Cal Grant B, or if they're a student with dependent children, they can get the access award, which is additional money, which is additional grant money they don't have to pay back. So that's kind of how the Cal Grant works. But yeah, so FAFSA or GMAT application plus GPA, that's how a student gets considered for Cal Grant. Let's see, check that. Let's see, yeah, I'm gonna check the chat. Yeah, so okay, that's how a student gets considered for Cal Grant. So you have different levels of Cal Grant. You have Cal Grant A, you have Cal Grant B, you have Cal Grant C. And I'm just going to let y'all look at this really quickly, because if I start going too deep into it, it's going to take a lot of time. But yeah, long story short, actually, I think the next couple of slides cover this pretty well. But as you can see, there are different awards depending on which institution you are, which goes back to one of our previous slides, which says cost of attendance. So I can't give you a clear number what the student is going to get because we don't know what college the student is going to attend. Once we know that information, then we know the expected family contribution. We can start to figure out, okay, this student might qualify for this. But once again, let us do that math. Don't try and encourage students to try and work it on their own. These applications are free. They take like 2 to 3 hours if the students have their documents ready to go, and students and parents and guardians have their documents ready to go. And so it's just simpler if they fill out the free application. Let's see, the no Cal Grant zone. So one thing which y'all can definitely encourage students is making sure that they keep their GPA up. So a Cal Grant, the different Cal Grants have different income and asset ceilings. And kind of that's what this is talking about. I think it's covered better here. So you can actually visually see. So there's Cal Grant A and Cal Grant B. They have different income and asset ceilings depending on their household size, right? With that being said, for a Cal Grant A student would have to get a 3.0 GPA, whereas a Cal Grant B student has to maintain above a 2.0 GPA. Now, once they get into college, the maintaining GPA changes. They just have to be in good standing. But in order to qualify out of high school, they do have to maintain this GPA. Now, what we call the no Cal Grant zone is those students who have above a 2.0 GPA, the income and asset size, the income and family size, it would qualify them for a Cal Grant A, but because they don't have a 3.0 GPA, they're in a no Cal Grant zone. Oh yeah, so that's kind of what there's different ways it can happen. Sometimes it can be flipped where they might have the GPA, but they don't have the income and asset size. They're in the wrong bracket for that. All this to say, it's just easier for students to maintain at least above a 3.0. So if you can encourage students, if you have access students who are in the 9th grade right now, please let them know, like, hey, maintaining above a 3.0 can literally be the difference between being able to get tuition and fees paid for at a public university for 4 years versus not. So it can go a really long way. So one of the things, if you want to take anything from this slide, it's encourage students to maintain above a 3.0. It will make life a lot easier for them in terms of Cal Grant, because you don't want to be in a situation where you couldn't have gotten a 4-year grant that covers tuition and fees, but because your GPA was just a little bit off, despite the fact that your income and family size would have qualified you, now you can't get that award, which would be sad. So we don't want that to happen. And just to give you a quick primer, Cal Grant A, that one would give a student pay for tuition and fees at a 4-year university, community public universities for 4 years. And so every year it gives that tuition and fees award. At a public university, it pretty much covers tuition and fees, whereas at other schools, it does just give that award. It would go to tuition and fees and might not necessarily cover tuition and fees at a private school. Cal Grant B gives you an access award, which is that stipend I was talking about earlier. Let me actually go back a few slides because I figured this might be helpful. Cal Grant B will give you that access award in the first year, and then in subsequent years, you get the tuition and fees payment and the access award. And then Cal Grant C, that is for vocational or trades or training, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's just for an eligible program. It's slightly less than Cal Grant A and B and C, but that's pretty much what it's for. All this to say, encourage students just to maintain above a 3.0 GPA. It'll make their Cal Grant lives so much easier. And then actually, I think we've talked about that. And then we also have what is called the middle class scholarship. Middle class scholarship, it will waive tuition and fees for 35% at a public university, so UC or CSU. So once again, for our middle class students who say, I make too much income and I should not be filling out the application. They actually should, because they never know what they could get, and they could waive 35% of their tuition and fees at a school. And I don't know about you, but 35% of tuition and fees off is a lot better than 0% of tuition and fees off. So please encourage students, regardless of the income and assets, to fill out the application. Encourage their parents and guardians, because you're going to see why it's important for parents and guardians to participate in this process. CHAFEE grant for foster youth, that is a separate application. So as a foster youth student who has been living foster care, has been awarded courts for a day between the age of 16 to 18, that student will have to fill out a FAFSA or a CADAA. And in addition to that, they'll have to fill out a CHAFEE grant application. The beautiful thing about a CHAFEE grant application is it only needs to be filled out once. So once the student fills it out once and gets their CDSS verification, which is a State Department that verifies that they're they were awarded with the court, or they were in foster care for a day at least between the age of 16 and 18. Once they get that done once, they can get a $5,000 award every single year. And so this is something we really like to encourage our CHAFEE foster youth to apply for. They can be undocumented and receive these funds. They can be permanent residents, they can be US citizens and receive these funds, these CHAFEE grant funds. They just need to make sure they fill out this additional application on top of either their FAFSA or their CADAA. Like I said, apologize for the speed I'm going through this. We got a lot to cover. Information for all financial aid websites. I'll let y'all look at that when you get the presentation. But there's a lot of great stuff on our website. Please check it out. Before students begin, please encourage them to actually set up their login passwords. This is because if you're going to host a workshop, if you're going to host a workshop at your school, a financial aid workshop, or a cash for college workshop, it wastes so much time if the student hasn't even looked at the application yet, because you're going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes helping that student create their usernames and their passwords and all that stuff. So please make sure that they get it right. The other thing, that they do it before you have a workshop, before you assist them. It makes things so much smoother. The other thing that we recommend is make sure that the students know to put in their full names, because a lot of students mess this up. They put in nicknames, they put in abbreviations of their names. That's not how these applications work. You need to put in your full name. And how do we make sure that students are putting in the correct name? Well, one, for US citizens, it's a permanent residence. We need to use the name that is on their social security card. That's the name that should be going on the application. For undocumented students, it should be the name that is on their school ID, on their school documents. That's the name that should be going on the application. This is something that you're going to see continuously come up about students getting their name right, because a lot of students get it wrong. So it's very important. In terms of email address, also very critical. Please encourage students and parents and guardians not to use institutional emails. Please encourage them to use their own personal email, because what tends to happen is a student will graduate from high school, graduate from community college, and all of a sudden they get kicked off the server, so they don't have access to these applications. Well, the FAFSA and the CADAA, those are applications that need to be filled out every single year while the student is planning on attending college. So students need to make sure that they have access to that. CHAFEE grant is different, only needs to be done once, but FAFSA and CADAA need to be done every single year the student plans on attending college. So please make sure that they get that right. And then the rest, secret answers and questions, that stuff everybody kind of knows, I think, by now, because we've all logged into an app. So yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, who is the FAFSA for? That is for all US citizens, legal permanent residents, certain designations of including refugees and those granted asylum, T visa holders. That tends to happen with kind of victims of human trafficking and things of that nature. But yeah, that is who should be filling out the FAFSA. And once again, students should only fill out one application. They shouldn't be filling out the FAFSA and the CADAA. They should be filling out the FAFSA or the CADAA. They should be filling out one of them, either the FAFSA or the CADAA, not both. So creating an FSA ID. What is an FSA ID? So remember I was talking about logins and usernames and passwords. I like to think of an FSA ID as kind of a username. It's creating your FAFSA login and username. When it comes to FSA ID though, it's going to ask you for some stuff. So whereas when you log into any app, it's going to ask you for your email, your name, your date of birth, FSA ID will ask for all those things as well as your social security number. So that's why, once again, US citizens and permanent residents are the ones who fill out the FAFSA, because undocumented students don't have a social security number. So FSA ID, that's going to be something that is going to ask for social security number, date of birth, and all that sensitive information. With that being said, for students who are considered dependents, the shortcut I'm going to use for how to determine whether a student is a dependent is if they're under 24. If they're under 24, don't have kids, and are not in the military, if they're considered dependents, then they will also have to have their parents create an FSA ID. And that FSA ID will be how the parent signs the application. Now, I know that's kind of raising some alarm bells for you all about, whoa. Let's actually go to the next slide. That's raising some alarm bells for you. It's like, okay, if a student is a permanent resident, a US citizen, yes, they have a social security card or a social security number. But some instances, the student might have a social security number, but the parent might not. We live in California. There's a lot of mixed status households in California where parents are undocumented, student has document or has a permanent resident or is a US citizen. In those particular instances, the parent cannot create an FSA ID because, once again, FSA ID requires a social security number. What the parent must do is still fill out the information in the application, and they must print out a paper signature. So when the student finishes the application with the parent and the student have put in all the information, then what will happen is at the end, the student will be able to print out the paper signature. The parent must sign it and then mail it to the address that is on that signature page for the application to be complete, because the application will not be complete for a dependent student if the parent hasn't done that part, if the parent hasn't signed off on it. So that's pretty much how it works. Otherwise, if the parent does have a social security number and is able to create the FSA ID, which they should if they have a social security number, then they'll be able to sign and use the social security number electronically. They'll be able to do that. So that's kind of how it works. Now, we also know there's parents who do have social security numbers but are subject to fraud and they have issues with the social security number. So for those reasons, they can't create an FSA ID. Same thing, they would have to print out the signature page and mail it in. And continuously on that train of thought about parents who don't have social security numbers, another thing is when they fill out the application will ask them for their social security number. Throughout the application, they should just put in zeros. So they should put in zeros. However, they shouldn't use zeros to make an FSA ID. Remember, if the parent doesn't have a social security number, they should not be using, they should be printing out the signature page. They should not be creating an FSA ID. So I hope that is clear. And judging by what I'm looking at the chat, looks like there's a lot of questions. So yes, so please make sure that, please make sure you keep asking questions. I think I just saw a recent question about most of this information applies to the 2022-2023 cycle. I will say right now that the Department of Education is changing their FAFSA. They're shortening their FAFSA, moving a lot of questions. We have now, a lot of this information will still be relevant to that new application. We just know that they're cutting down some of the stuff. We have a sense of what they're cutting down, but they haven't given us the full questions yet. And that's not going to come up until August or September, just letting you all know. But a lot of this information will definitely apply because of just what they've indicated to us that they plan on cutting. So I know that was a question. I just saw that right now. So I wanted to take care of that really quickly. But yeah. So that being said, I'm gonna keep moving. So California GMAT application, how am I doing on time? Okay, I'm like 30 minutes in. So California GMAT application, that is for undocumented students with or without DACA. I'm gonna say that again. That's for undocumented students with or without DACA. Another myth that is perpetuated across California. I don't know why. I don't know who's starting all these rumors. I want to find that person and make them sit through this presentation. But that being said, a lot of students believe they have to have DACA in order to fill out a California GMAT application. That's not true. That is not true. A lot of students with DACA think that they can fill out the FAFSA. That is also not true. If a student is undocumented with or without DACA, they should be filling out the California GMAT application and not the FAFSA. So I hope that is clarified. I hope that is clear. I know some students will say, well, I have a DACA social security number, or I have a DACA, that doesn't count. No, that's not how it works. DACA is a federal work program that allows students to work in the United States. Undocumented students to work in the United States. It does not affect financial aid, but if a student does have DACA, if they're a DACA recipient, then it is very clear that they should fill out the California GMAT application. TPS status and U visa holders, these are the students who can apply for the California GMAT application. So whereas the FAFSA needs an FSA ID, the California GMAT application has a user ID and password. And I think this will be covered later. Actually, we'll wait for that. But yeah, user ID and password. Same thing, same rules apply here. Want to make sure that that name is being done right. Now, like I remember how I told you, this accurate name thing is going to keep coming up. Yes, it's going to keep coming up because a lot of students mess this up. Like a lot of students really mess this up. They mess up their name. I know that's crazy, but they do. Date of birth. This also is something that we want to make sure is accurate. You know, sometimes a parent might be filling it in for their child and then they confuse their children with the other sibling. It's like, oh, I put in James' birthday instead of John's birthday. Oh no. But we want to make sure that they get it right. We want to make sure that they get this demographic information right. An email address, remember, do not use an institutional email. Use a personal email that the student will have access to for multiple years. And keep going. So Selective Service, this is one of the updates that the Department of Education told us about last year. That will fully be going into effect this year. So long story short, right? The way Selective Service works, in previous years, students had to, male students between the ages of 18 and 25 had to register for Selective Service in order for their financial aid to disperse. So there was a question on both applications, FAFSA and CADAA, say, have you registered for Selective Service? On the FAFSA, the student could just say yes, could register for Selective Service while filling out the FAFSA. On the CADAA, the student had to mail it in. The federal government, as well as the California state government, has said that is no longer a requirement. They've removed that requirement. However, for this particular year, that question is still on the application. So something I'll let you all know, we're still in the 2022-2023 cycle. Students can still fill out their financial aid application. And for students going to community college, their deadline is actually September 2nd. I know we always talk about the March 2nd deadline, but September 2nd is the deadline for students going to community college for them to be able to receive a Cal Grant award, an entitlement Cal Grant award, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later. But with that being said, that question is still on the current application. It would definitely be off the next application, the I'll say 23-24 application. It'll be off that application. But if you still have students who are filling out the application, they can just say no and move on. It's not going to affect their financial aid anymore. If they don't receive Selective Service, it will not stop the disbursement of their financial aid. With that being said, we're not saying students should mail students should not register for Selective Service. That is still an actual thing. Students still have to register for it. We're just saying it will not affect financial aid anymore. So that's kind of what we're saying. So please don't go out there and say, hey, Richard Cooper from CSAC told students they shouldn't register for Selective Service. That's not what I said at all. What I said is it will not affect their financial aid if they haven't. That is a new rule. So some tips: don't confuse parent information questions with student information questions. Please make sure that the students and parents read carefully. What you will find is when the application is saying you or yours, more often than not, it is talking to the student unless it is specified that it's not talking to the parent. But most of the time it's talking to the student when it says you or yours. That's why it's so critical for it not just to be the parent who fills out the application, because it's so easy to get confused. And it's so critical for it not just be the student, because there is a parent section in this application if the student is a dependent student, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. Email and postal address, I think I've covered that a lot. So some common errors. This one mainly applies for high school seniors, and it's pretty straightforward. These are just answers that high school seniors should give instead of overthinking these particular questions. So I'm going to leave that to you all to kind of look at the presentation, because I want to make sure that we get through this with time. But it's very straightforward. The high school seniors should not overthink these specific questions, because 99% of the time, these answers that we highlighted in red are going to be the answers for them. College selection. Okay. So with college selection, it's couple of things. One, students can look up the name of their college. They can, like, if you're like, so my college was University of California, Santa Barbara. I hate typing out University of California, Santa Barbara. So I'll just type in Santa, and that will bring up any university that has Santa in it. That's our way of letting people know that the search function for both on the FAFSA and the CADAA, you don't have to put in the whole full college's name. You can just put in a portion of it and it'll bring up every college with that name, if that helps students. The other thing that we also like to mention about college selection is that students can pick up to 10 colleges at a time. If they have more than 10 colleges, because we all know those, we have some of our students who will apply to 20, 30 colleges. We all have students like that. If they're planning on doing that, what they can do is put in their first list of 10 colleges, come back a week later and put in another list of 10 colleges. And all these colleges will receive the application. All these colleges will receive that application, and they won't know what order they were put in. They'll just know, hey, someone was thinking about us. Yay, celebrate. The student wants to go here. So that's kind of how it works. However, something that I genuinely need y'all to pay attention to. Please, please, please pay attention. Pay very close attention to this fact, because it could save your student. When the student is putting in their college of 10, the initial list of college of 10, please make sure that they put in at least one California college in there. Preferably a California college from each segment. So a community college, a UC, a CSU, and a private college. The reason for that is when a student doesn't put in a California college on the application, we don't get the application to process them for a Cal Grant. Remember what I said about the Cal Grant? At some schools, literally can cover tuition and fees for 4 years without the student having to repay that. That is huge. That is huge. And if the student thinks, oh, wait, I want to go out of state, I'm going to tell you right now, there's not a lot of out-of-state schools that would say, we will cover your tuition and fees at a premier university for 4 years. That doesn't happen at a lot of out-of-state schools for a lot of out-of-state students. So with that being said, we want students just to be able to weigh their options. And the easiest way for them to see that is by putting a California college in their list of 10. Because if they don't do that and they want to be considered for Cal Grant, then they'll have to fill out some additional paperwork to do that. The simplest way is just make sure that first time they're doing it, make sure they put in at least one California college, preferably one from each segment, so that they can see their different financial aid options at the different colleges. And that might really affect their decision. And honestly, if students do this right when the application opens around October 1st, they can know by November, mid-November, what kind of, if they would get state aid at different colleges. They can know by mid-November. So that's why we encourage doing it early, because a lot of students are applying for colleges October, November. But if a student already knows, if I stay in California and go to specific schools, I can get my tuition and fees covered for 4 years. That's a dramatic change in how they will view their college admissions process. And so that's just something we want to put out there. But hopefully y'all got that. And then, as someone already asked, we are right now talking to the 2022-2023 cycle, because it's actually not done. Once again, community college students can still get entitlement Cal Grant awards up until September 2nd. We'll talk about entitlement, what that means a little bit later. But yeah, so that we're still in that cycle. But a lot of this information will most definitely apply to the 2023-2024 cycle. With that being said, the way financial aid is a little bit weird. We're always kind of in 3 years. So we're working with 3 years. So right now we're talking about the 2022-2023 cycle. The application opened on October 1st, but we're using 2020 taxes. We call that prior tax information. So whenever you fill out a financial aid application, it's always going to ask for prior tax information, not necessarily information. So tax information from 2 years ago. That's raising some alarm bells in some of your heads because, like, well, a lot's happened in 2 years. We'll talk about a little bit later what to do when those 2 years tax information does not match what's currently going on. But with that being said, that's the kind of tax information these applications are asking for. They're asking for prior tax information because for a lot of students, sometimes this situation does not change within 2 years. But we know we're kind of in a global pandemic, so that's been happening. That's why we're all virtual right now. So we'll talk about what to do in those kinds of special circumstances. Income and asset questions. For income and asset questions, FAFSA filers, this is a tool FAFSA filers can definitely use. Please make sure that they use the IRS data retrieval tool. It's pretty simple tool to use. For FAFSA filers, and remember, there is a student and income asset section as well as a parent income and asset section. So let's say if a student filed their taxes or the parent filed their taxes, the FAFSA will ask the students, hey, you may be eligible for IRS for the IRS data retrieval tool. And we'll ask them like 3 or 4 questions. If they fill it out, and then it will tell them, actually, you are eligible or you're not eligible. And if they're eligible, what they can do is it will take them to a site on the IRS's website, and they'll put in some identification information, so like their name, social, all that stuff. And then it will transfer the information from the IRS's site onto the application in an encrypted manner. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the most secure way to do it for FAFSA filers, because one of the things is, which I'll just mention right now, there's a thing called verification in financial aid. 1 in 5 students get selected for verification. It's pretty random. And what verification means is that students are asked after they've submitted their financial aid to pretty much submit more tax documents to verify that the information they put on the application was correct. So 1 in 5 students are selected. It's a way to keep students honest, but it can get really messy and can get really frustrating because if a student doesn't complete that additional verification process, if they're selected, then they won't get their financial aid. The reason why this ties into the IRS data retrieval tool is because a student is less likely to be selected for verification if they use the IRS data retrieval tool. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but they're less likely to be selected. Another thing that we like to mention, unsure of the exact amounts, yes. So this happens pretty often where a student is filling out the FAFSA or the CADAA, and their parents filling it out, and they realize, ooh, I should have filed my taxes. And like, oh man, I need to file my taxes. But the applications have these deadlines. For 4-year universities, the deadline for the entitlement award is March 2nd. For community college students, the deadline for the entitlement award is September 2nd. What do? I'm trying to make sure I meet all these deadlines. Well, what we say is, yes, give an educated guess, submit your application, and then go file your taxes, then come back and correct that information. So, and your application will still be on time. So that's something that we'd like to tell people, because the applications can be corrected. I think after you make some corrections, if you make a bunch of corrections, you can't make any more corrections. I believe for 24 hours, you have to wait 24 hours before you can make another set of corrections, but the application can be corrected. But if it's already been submitted, then it counts as the date of submission, not the date of correction, if that makes sense. So remember how I said we're going to talk about special circumstances? Well, this is us talking about it. So what are special circumstances? When we talked about how in financial aid, students must use their prior tax information. And what a special circumstances is when a student submits their prior tax information on the application, but their current situation doesn't reflect what is on those prior taxes. So what could have happened is there could have been a divorce within those 2 years. There could have been a loss of job or income from one of the parents or guardians. There could be adverse home situations, different things, unexpected medical expenses. We know life happens, and life has happened to all of us in these past 2 years. That being said, the rule of thumb is if there's a special circumstance where what was currently put into the students to calculate the expected family contribution is not currently matching their current situation, the students should always go to their financial aid office at their college. I'll repeat that again. They should always go to the financial aid office at their college. They're the ones to do what is called a professional judgment. So they can change a student's expected family contribution. They could do that. They have the power to do that. We at CSAC, we don't have the power to do that. The power has been given to the colleges. And so the colleges, it depends. I can't tell you what the process is for colleges. They have different processes, but most of them, they'll probably ask you to fill out a bunch of forms and ask you for some method of verification to say that situation that you're claiming happened actually did happen. So that's how it works when there's a special circumstance. Dependency question. So I've been talking about dependency. You've heard me say dependency a lot. Now let me explain what it actually is. Long story short, if a student is a dependent student, that means they need parent information on the application for the application to be complete. If the student is an independent student, that means they don't need parent information for the application to be complete. Why is this important? Well, if a student is a dependent student and they don't get the parent information, then the application, or they can submit the application and they can submit without parent information. But what will happen is the student will not qualify for any grant aid. They'll only be able to take out unsubsidized loans. So for those parents, when you're talking to parents who say, if I don't put my information on the application, then my student will get more money. It's not how it works. If the application says that student is a dependent student, then that parent needs to put in that information and needs to sign the application for it to be complete. Otherwise, the student is going to be, even if they qualified for grant aid, they won't be able to get it. So these are kind of a summary. I think this is about 3/4 of the kinds of questions that are asked about dependency. The way it works is if a student answers yes to any one of these questions, they're an independent student. So if they say, will you be 24 or older? If they answer yes to that, even if they answer no to the rest, they're independent students, so they don't need parent information. If they answer no to all the questions, then they are a dependent student. So if they answer no, they're dependent. If they answer yes to any one of them, then they're an independent. And remember, independent means you don't need parent information signature. Dependent means you do. With that being said, some of these questions, even if a student answers yes, they will be asked for additional information about their college to verify. Okay. Let's say you're in foster care. Okay, let's see the foster care documentation to say that a court said that you're in foster care. Let's see that. So they might ask for some of that documentation. If you're an unaccompanied youth who's homeless, self-supporting, they might verify that for you. The college financial aid office might verify that for you, or they might ask a shelter or homeless shelter or anybody, or your school district with the high school that you're coming to verify that for the student. So once again, some of these might ask for additional information, but the basic rule of thumb is if a student answers yes to any one of these questions, they're independent. If they answer no to all of them, then they're dependent. Now, actually, let's go over this. Something will be covered later, but something I'll just briefly mention here. Sometimes a student will answer no to all these questions. Sometimes a student answer no to all these questions, but for some reason they cannot get the information from their parents. That's also a special circumstance. And it could be a very serious reason why they probably should not be around their parent. In those cases, they once again should go to the college financial aid office, because in any situation that's a special circumstance, the student should probably always go to the financial aid college, the college financial aid office, because they have the power to change stuff and change dependency to independency. They can do that. Let's see. Let's see. So whose information goes to FAFSA? I think I read a question about how long does it take for a web grant to process info from the FAFSA? Yeah, so it can take about 6 weeks. Typically, that's what I've noticed. It takes about 6 weeks for them to process that information. So if a student fills out the application by, someone just messaged me that question. If a student fills out the application by like October 1st, then they can know by mid-November through web grants where they got a Cal grant. So it can take about like 6 weeks. So who's my parent? Whose information goes on a FAFSA or CADAA? This applies to both applications. Let's see. I'm going to try and wrap this up in the next 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to be quick about this. Whose information goes on the application? So this is to help you all when a student is trying to figure out whose information goes on their application, whether it's FAFSA or CADAA. This chart answers 99% of all those questions. So that being said, are the parents married to each other? If the parents are married to each other, yes, then the student reports both parents' information on the application. If they're not, then if they're not married, then do the parents live together? If the parents are unmarried, live together, then yes, the student reports both parents' information on the application. If the parents are unmarried, and if the parents are unmarried, do not live together, then the question then becomes, did the student live with one parent more than the other over the past 12 months? If the student lived with one parent over the other over the past 12 months, so the parents were unmarried, the parents do not live together, but the student spent more time over the past 12 months with one parent than the other, then the student reports that parent information on the application, the one who they spend more time with. If the student spent roughly the same amount of time with both parents and the parents are unmarried and don't live together, then the next question becomes, well, who financially supported the student the most over the past 12 months. Whoever that parent is the parent whose information goes on the application. Now, in situations where the parent who financially supported the student the most over the past 12 months, or the parent who the student lived with more over the past 12 months, in situations where those parents remarry, then the student also reports their step parent. If those parents have not remarried, then the student is done. They just keep it to that one parent. So I hope that kind of answers y'all's questions. I know there's a lot of questions, and I know we're breezing through this because once again, there's an hour and a half presentation that is being condensed to 50 minutes. So I'm trying to go through this fast. But if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask. But this covers 99% of the scenarios of whose parent information goes on the application. And so the following people are not parents unless legally adopted. What do we mean by legal adoption? What we mean by that is if it wasn't done by a court and a judge, it would not count as legal guardianship, or it's not a legal adoption in our eyes. If it was just done by a private attorney, then that doesn't count. It needs to be done by a court or a judge for it to count. That's what we mean by legal adoption. So even if the students live with their aunt or uncle, whether it's their parent, grandparents, doesn't count. It doesn't mean that these individuals have legally adopted them, at least in financial aid terms, unless they've gone through a judge and it's been done through a court. And so that's kind of how it works. So this is another special circumstance about dependency. What if a student's parents live in another country? If a student's parents live in another country and the student is a dependent student, then the student still needs to put the information on the application, even if they live in another country. However, if the student cannot contact those parents who are in another country, then the student should go to their college financial aid office and they can do what is called a dependency override, changing the status of the student from dependent to independent. But once again, this tends to be done in very serious circumstances. It's not going to be a situation where the student says, I'm 18, so I don't want to put my parents' information on there, or my parents just don't want to do that. That will not count. Remember, if parents take that position, they will be severely limiting the financial aid that the student can get. The student will only qualify for unsubsidized loans. So I want to make this very clear that with college financial aid offices, they take this very seriously, and they only tend to do this in very serious circumstances. So some of you who would be talking to parents, please, I know a lot of parents really think that if they don't put the information on the application, they can get away with that and they shouldn't get more money. That's not how it works. Household size, okay. This one is a bit of a complex calculation, so bear with me. I know there might be some questions here. First thing we need to get out of the way, it doesn't have anything to do with who claimed who on whose taxes. That's the first misconception. Let's get that out of the way. It doesn't have anything to do with that. So yeah, it doesn't matter how many dependents you claimed on your taxes. Household size has nothing to do with that. The way you should think about this is this. Students and children, students who were children of the head of household will always count as a part of the household. So a student could be studying in college, they could be studying abroad, they could be out of the country. As long as they're receiving 50% plus or more support from their parent, or as long as they would be considered a dependent under those lists of questions I mentioned earlier, they could be considered a part of the household. They are always considered part of the household, regardless of their location, regardless of whether they're living with the head of households or with their parents or not. It doesn't matter. They will be considered, if they would be considered a dependent, or if they're receiving 50% plus or more support in the following year. So that's children. Children count. However, other individuals have to be receiving 50% plus or more support in the following year, as well as living with the head of household. So let's say if the head of household is supporting a family is supporting an aunt and an uncle in another country, and is supporting the 50% plus or more in another country, that doesn't count as a part of the household because that aunt or uncle is not living with the head of household. However, if they're supporting a child in another country, that would count because they're a child. They're part of their child of the head of household. So that's how household calculation works. So the reason why this is important is when you saw that chart early in the presentation that says household size and income, because we do determine, okay, based on your household size, if you make this much, you might qualify for this grant. So it's an important calculation, and that's how that calculation is made. And so if y'all have any questions about that, please feel free to ask that in the chat. A couple of things. I think we're wrapping up. Let's see that. Okay, 6 minutes. So if you can do this. So March 2nd deadline. Once again, that deadline is important for students going to four-year universities. So if you're transferring from a community college to a four-year university, if you're going from high school to a four-year, that deadline is important. And at this point, I'll explain to you what the entitlement means. So what entitlement means is we talked about Cal Grant Awards, right? We talked about that earlier, that you have to meet those income and asset eligibility requirements and the student has to meet those GPA requirements. We talked about that earlier. For students to be entitled to that award, meaning that they're going to get that award if they're absolutely going to get that award if they meet those income and asset requirements. For students to be entitled to that award, if they're going to be a four-year university, then they have to fill out their application by March 2nd. That's how that works. So if they're going to a four-year university and they meet those income and asset requirements and they have that GPA requirement, then they have to make sure that they fill out the application by March 2nd in order to get that entitlement award. That's why it's so critical to get this done as soon as possible. For community college students, that deadline for them to get that entitlement award is September 2nd. Now, what happens if they miss the deadline, right? Let's say they miss the deadline, there's no deadline extension. They go into what is called the competitive pool. In the competitive pool, I remember I saw some statistics about this a while ago, and someone actually put it this way, that students have a better chance of winning in Vegas than they do of getting a competitive Cal Grant in some situations. All this to say, the best way I like to put it is, if a student is not filling out the application by these deadlines, if they're not filling out by March 2nd, if they're going to a four-year, or they're not filling out by September 2nd, if they're going to a community college, they're literally gambling their financial aid away unnecessarily. So that's why it's so important for students to meet these deadlines, so that if they do meet those requirements, they can get that entitlement award. And some of these other tips I've mentioned a lot, so I'm just going to breeze through them. Checking the email, creating a web grants for students account. Web grants, I know that was mentioned in the chat, but that's where you can see what kind of awards a student is getting. And also, please encourage students not to be afraid to ask for help. Common application mistakes. I'll let y'all read this because y'all are getting the PowerPoint. I think most of these have been covered in some way or the other, so I'll let y'all read that on your own. CHAFEE grant fraud suits, I did cover this a lot earlier, but I'm just going to go through it really quickly once again, because I know we've had some new people join. So once again, if a student was a ward of the court or was in foster care between the age of 16 to 18 for at least a day, then they can qualify for the CHAFEE grant. They just have to fill that application out in addition to filling out either their FAFSA or their CADAA. So they have to fill out that CHAFEE grant application. That one has to be just done once. And then they have to do the CDSS verification, also has to be done once. And then the student will qualify for $5,000 annually on top of their other financial aid award. So that's how that works. And I already mentioned this, so not need to mention this again. Let's see, 52, okay. Starting around out of time. Web grants for students. Long story short, web grants for students, great tool. We want students to be using this to be able to log in and to be able to check their financial aid, to be able to confirm which college they're attending. Really great tool to help students to keep track of their financial aid and take over their financial aid destiny. We recommend waiting, as you can see, about 7 to 10 days after they've submitted their financial aid application. So mygrantinfo.csac.ca.gov, that is the website. For our undocumented students who fill out the CADAA, the way it now works is that login for the CADAA will actually also be their login for web grants. So we've been able to kind of integrate those two systems together. So that's a quick tip for those of you to know that if the student fills out their CADAA first, then the login for the CADAA, the username and password will be the same for web grants. But that's web grants, really great tool. You can see a bunch of different stuff there. Let's see. Okay.
We're about 2 minutes, Edwin.
2 minutes. Awesome. Okay. We're going to skip a bunch of this other stuff because we got 2 minutes. Actually, yeah. So let's see. I'll just end on this one. So sample award letter. In terms of sample award letter, want to make sure that you help students read their sample award letter. Make sure that so that they can calculate cost of attendance. It's really important for them to know what the cost of attendance of their school is. So just because they might be getting more money at a school does not necessarily mean that they won't be taking out more in loans. What do I mean by that? So let's say if the cost of attendance for a school is $70,000 and they get $50,000 in financial aid at one school. So, okay, now what they have to bring to the table is $20,000, which they'll probably take out in loans or work to pay that off. Whereas if they go to a school that has, let's say, a cost of attendance of $30,000, but they only get $15,000, well, they only have to bring $15,000 out of their own pocket. So all this to say, please help students really read these financial aid award letters carefully. If they have questions, please be their resource and we can assist, but also the colleges are also great resources to assist, and also encourage students to apply for scholarships and different things. But yeah, I will end it on there. I like to end on engaging us with social media, following us on social media. Once again, y'all get a copy of the PowerPoint. There's a lot more resources that I couldn't get to because of time, but y'all be able to see them for yourselves. But please follow us on all social media. We post great resources, great content. I cannot guarantee we'll follow you back, but I can guarantee you that you will get a lot of great information from us. So we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, we're all over the place. So follow us. I hope this presentation was helpful and informative. And yeah, it looks like we're still getting questions. I don't know. I know it's 10:55. I think we're supposed to wrap up right now. I don't know if if I can stay around maybe for an extra 5 minutes to try and answer questions through the chat or verbally. But Pedro, I will hand it back to you because you're kind of moderating this for now. But thank you all. Hope that helped.
Thank you first and foremost. It was just tons and tons of resources and information. The chat room was buzzing for sure. And yeah, if you want to stick around, I know Jenny's been awesome with handling all of those questions. And I do want to remind folks out there that the materials that you have seen will be made available to you on the SCED platform for you. That's the SCED platform app. And the recording from this session will also be made available to you by day's end, or if not by tomorrow, on the CASC event webpage. So we do appreciate you all joining us, and if you want to stick around, Edwin's here. I know some folks have to go to the next session. I believe is the awards here at 11 a.m. So stick around if you'd like, and you can use the chat if you want, or unmute yourself. I'll stick around as long as you need me to be here. But thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your conference. Okay, I think most folks are wrapping up, so I will go ahead and stop recording here. Thank you so much, Edwin. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Awesome. Thank you all. Hope you all have a great day. I think I'm going to log off. Doesn't look like there's any more questions, but if you do, please feel free to email us and we'll get back to you. But thank you all and hope you all have a great day. Bye.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Recording will stop now.